Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings. A joke I heard years ago in law school in my legal ethics class, now known as professional responsibility, was that the only time most lawyers are in court is if they're offered testimony or they're being sued for malpractice. It's a rare breed of lawyer that ends up becoming a litigator, and we happen to have one of the most famous and perhaps even feared trial lawyers on the planet as our guest today, and one who also happens to have ties to Hollywood, as you'll soon see. John Quinn is the founder and chairman of the nearly 4-decade-old Los Angeles firm of Quinn Emanuel Urquhart Sullivan. The firm has been voted the world's most feared law firm on 10 separate occasions by independent research provider BTI Consulting, which surveyed over 300 key legal decision makers at the world's largest organizations. In fact, in BTI's annual survey, when respondents were asked to name the law firm they least wanted to face as opposing counsel, Quinn Emanuel was consistently ranked as the top firm amongst the world's most feared litigators. Since 1986, John and his partners have arguably built the largest law firm in the world devoted solely to business litigation and arbitration. In fact, it's one that the Wall Street Journal has called a global litigation powerhouse. Over the course of 4 decades, Quinn Emanuel has grown to 35 offices in 12 countries on 4 continents, with over 1,100 lawyers, generating close to $2 billion in annual fees. In recent years, the firm has recovered over $80 billion for its plaintiffs. John also is connected to Hollywood, where for 33 years he served as general counsel to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the organization behind the Oscars. An avid mountain climber, Ironman triathlete, and father of 5, he's also the host of the popular podcast, Law Disrupted. That's available at www.law-disrupted.fm. And with that, I turn it over to John. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up, and what put you on the path to becoming a lawyer?
Well, until the age of 12, I grew up I was living in Greenwich, Connecticut, and at the age of 12, my family moved to Bountiful, Utah, a rural town north of Salt Lake City. It was a radical change to go from Greenwich, Connecticut to Bountiful, Utah. I graduated high school there, college in L.A. at Claremont McKenna College, law school at Harvard, had my first legal job in New York City. Liked the firm, didn't understand how you raised a family in the city, left after 2 years, moved back to L.A., which I loved, bounced around a little bit and started this firm January 1, 1986. As to how I became a lawyer, I come from one side of my family. There are a lot of lawyers, and I am the 7th of 8 children, and I think 3 of us are lawyers and a couple are married to lawyers. So law and lawyering kind of runs in my family. I kind of always knew in the back of my head that law was an option, and it's been a path I've never regretted choosing.
It's interesting because people think Greenwich, Connecticut. I mean, I don't want to play like stereotypes. They think, okay, old-time Yankee, blue blood wasp. Yeah, the Ivy League, Harvard Law was pretty much ordained for this guy, yeah.
The Greenwich I grew up in is not the hedge fund capital of the world, which Greenwich is today. I went to elementary school with kids where Italian was spoken in the home. It was very ethnic then, parts of Greenwich were. And, that wasn't the Greenwich I knew at all. And, not a blue blood family, maybe Mormon blue blood. My great-great-grandfather was this scout for Brigham Young and the first Latter-day Saints, who ended up in the Salt Lake Valley. But that's my background.
The thing about the litigators that I know, they're the most uber, hyper-aggressive, ambitious, type A personalities you will ever meet. They're incredibly combative. They're incredibly competitive. I mean, you can't be a litigator if you don't think something of yourself, honestly. I mean, there's a high degree of ego involved in this, and I guess what I'm wondering is, did being in the profession toughen you up and give you that killer instinct, or did you have that verbal prowess and the competitiveness?
No, I mean, look, I mean, obviously, litigators, we deal in words and we deal in advocacy, both oral and written advocacy. So, and it is, you have an adversary. That's our adversarial system. And there's winners and there's losers. So it's, in a sense, it's competitive. And you can't be thin-skinned or faint of heart to be a litigator. But that doesn't mean you always have to be aggressive and combative the way you describe. In fact, I think that's a failure of a lot of lawyers. To be successful, you have to kind of modulate your personality and your approach to the circumstances, the parties, the other side, the court or decision maker. So it is combative, and I do think that you have to, winning has to matter to you a lot. But in terms of your demeanor and your approach to the other side in the court, I think that really much depends on the circumstances.
Sometimes, I mean, I've seen with government lawyers, I mean, look, it's their job to present their case based on the evidence in the case file. It's the role of, say, a defense attorney to fight for their man till the death, till the end. Sometimes I get the feeling that government lawyers, how can I put it? They like their jobs a little too much, to the point of being sadistic. But that's just my take on it. But you've had such an interesting career. I mean, in terms of what's germane to us. I mean, you represented the Bank of China, Alibaba, Alipay, Ant Financial. I mean, just based on that, I mean, what are your impressions of banking and the fintech digital payment scene in China? And more broadly, what are your thoughts on doing business in China, especially in the current environment?
I don't know enough to speak intelligently on terms of digital payments, in China domestically, and really what's going on there. I mean, we are very fortunate. We have offices in Shanghai and Beijing, as well as Hong Kong, and
sure. But what do your colleagues there tell you about the challenges they face and what it's like for them there?
We haven't had the same impact on our business that the deal lawyers have had. So inbound investment into China, which kept a lot of Chinese lawyers busy for the last several years, is really, really fallen off a cliff. But in terms of litigation and disputes and opportunities to help people with regulatory problems, both in China and in the West, in the case of Chinese companies, we don't really see much change. If anything, when there's times of friction, there is more need, perhaps, for people who can help resolve disputes. So it hasn't been it hasn't been a change for us.
And I think you kind of, something you alluded to, maybe litigation isn't always the best answer. I mean, I think your firm also does ADR, right? You also do
litigation should be the last resort.
Yeah.
When I get to the pearly gates and go on to my reward, I hope I'm going to get credit from St. Peter or whoever for all the clients I talked out of litigating and filing lawsuits. I mean, it's often, it's easy to start a lawsuit, but once they start, they take on a life of their own. So it's not something that should ever be done lightly. And in terms of other ways of resolving disputes, ADR, mediation, yes, certainly, especially in the U.S., any significant case, the court is going to expect you to go through a mediation process. And we're big believers in that process.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's the case in the federal system. I mean, I'd be surprised if that wasn't the case in the state court system as well. So we have that here. A good faith effort to resolve a dispute must be made before the proceedings continue any further. I recall, I mean, around about the time I graduated, at that time in the federal system, maybe 1 in 7 matters went to trial. and a decade earlier, say 92.
That wouldn't be far off. I mean, I would expect that the number of cases actually are even lower than that on a percentage basis. But it's going to depend a lot. It's going to depend a lot on venue by venue, whether you're talking about a big city or a rural area, state court, federal court. But it's very much a distinct minority of cases that actually go to trial.
So that segues into my next question. You were in Singapore recently to open your first office in the Lion City. Why Singapore?
There's so many reasons and indications about that we really should be in Singapore right now. I mean, for one thing, what we do in Asia, an awful lot, it's not 100%, it's not everything we do, but a lot of it is international arbitration. And there's been a very significant growth in the international arbitration filings in Singapore. So it's become more and more important. We've been doing cases, arbitrations in Singapore, staffing them out of Hong Kong or London or elsewhere. But the increase in the number of cases seated there has made it more and more important for us to have boots on the ground. The other thing I would say is the growth in India, the incredible economic story. India, the Indian economy growing at, GDP growing at over 7% a year. Singapore has always been the preferred venue for Indian companies and high net worth individuals to resolve their disputes. So from an Indian standpoint and what's going on there, Singapore has become more important in dispute resolution. And then the whole exposure to Southeast Asia and what's going on there in those economies. So, for all those reasons, we thought it'd be very important that would be in Singapore to be able to address and serve those markets.
We do cover India quite a bit on the show, or at least we have in recent times. It's interesting given the closed off nature of their legal system, and the stories I can tell you about how for many years you could say, okay, you could point to this X, Y, and Z prominent Indian law firm, and I could tell you who they were front for, which Anglo-American law firm they were fronting for. In much the same way, many of the, white shoe, Magic Circle, blue blood law firms, certainly the Magic Circle in London, were basically operating out of hotel rooms in Nariman Point in Mumbai, visiting their clients there. And that's how they were doing it. But I know you believe in Singapore's importance as a dispute resolution center, but what about Hong Kong? How do we compare in that regard? Because we also have the Hong Kong International Arbitration Center, which has been up and running for a number of years. And for a number of years, it was under the my friend Christopher Toe oversaw that. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Look, we've had an office in Hong Kong now for over 10 years, and we have 10 to 12 lawyers there in Hong Kong. But we're not, in any sense, this isn't a vote of lack of confidence in Hong Kong. We're very much committed to Hong Kong. We'll continue to do arbitrations there and have lawyers on the ground there. So I think that, obviously, Hong Kong addresses more of the Chinese market than probably Singapore does, although obviously you see arbitrations in Singapore that involve Chinese parties. The mix is more Chinese in Hong Kong. But, there's a lot of arbitration business in Hong Kong, and we're going to continue to participate in that, and I hope get more than our fair share.
Your point's well taken. Indeed, I think there's a growing sense that, under British rule, Hong Kong was more of a international city. Over time, post-handover, it became more of a regional city. And, with the passage of, even more time, certainly now, closer we get to 2047, it's going to become more of a Chinese city. It'll have its own unique characteristics because so long as they maintain the common law legal system. But, you got to look at where is the center of gravity? Where is the money? Where's the business? And, the gravity, you can't deny the gravitational pull of mainland China. But to your firm, you've been lauded for focusing purely on litigation, for not representing the world's largest money center banks. I wonder, is that wise in that some might say you're losing out on potentially lucrative client base? I mean, the other reasoning being the world's biggest banks have deep pockets, and that means they can pay top dollar for legal services.
Yeah, they can also pay hundreds of millions of dollars to our clients when we bring claims against them. I mean, we made a decision about 20 years ago not to represent the world's largest money center banks. There's about 10 or 12 of them: Citibank, Bank of America, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, HSBC, Deutsche Bank. We used to say Credit Suisse, because we thought there was an unmet need in the marketplace. You know, if you're a counterparty and you have a claim to bring against one of those banks, none of the Magic Circle firms, none of the major New York firms are going to touch those cases, because they have deal departments, transactional lawyers who want to do the deal work for those large banks, and they won't be adverse. So if you had to go to a second tier or third tier law firm to find a firm that would take on a case against say Goldman Sachs, and we thought that was an unmet need in the marketplace, and it certainly turned out to be true. You know, in 2008, we were able to, if you saw the movie The Big Short, the last act of that, which wasn't in the movie, we sued all those banks and recovered about $50 billion.
The mendacity and the lack of conscience on their part was staggering. I mean, as someone once said, in most other areas of life, people know that murder is wrong and stealing is wrong, and that you can't drive your car at top speed in reverse down Main Street, mowing people down as you go along. But all of a sudden, once you're in the financial world, it's like all semblance of decency, any kind of moral compass, goes out the window, and they're debating with the compliance head. Are you sure it says that in the rule book and the manual? Are you saying I can't do that? Well, you tell me I can't screw my client? I mean, I'm exaggerating, but not by much, because the attitude is nothing should get in the way of me scoring that deal, securing that trade, and guarantee my bonus for the end of the year. And I'm sorry, compliance officers, well, as with some people, some are strong-willed, some are weak and buckle, and but even at that, I mean, even the strong-willed compliance officers, how often are you going to say no before you get a reputation as being a deal killer? So, you know, and to your point about how many law firms don't want to take on the banks. I mean, I see that as a journalist. I mean, say HSBC is involved in something, and I need to comment on a particular matter. So many law firms will not give me a comment in some cases, because I occasionally do write about financial law and regulation, and it's because they've spread their business around such that they've got a good number of the firms in the town in their pocket. Hence, they're afraid to give even the mildest comment. So yeah, I see where you're coming from, and I applaud that, because bottom line, even the little guys need justice, and then where are they going to go?
Yeah, I mean, AJ, I won't comment on your scenarios and with the compliance people and the greed and the like. I mean, we deal with purely legal issues and and the fallout from those. So I mean, we think that our record speaks for itself, and we think the banks, they paid in 2008, for example, they paid hundreds of millions of dollars to settle cases, and I think they wouldn't have paid that if they didn't see some exposure in the positions they had taken.
Of course, it's to the point now where they figure fines are just, another cost of doing business, which brings us to the issue of governance, and that's a good seg to my next question, which was that at the Millikan Institute in Beverly Hills, about 2 years ago, May 2022, you chaired a panel entitled "Do Investors Understand ESG?" ESG's gotten a bad rap from influential figures in the business world, Warren Buffett, you know, the late Charlie Munger, his business partner, Elon Musk. ESG's gotten a bad rap. Well, what are your thoughts on it? And you know, what's the road forward? Because clearly there is a generational divide. Younger people, younger investors, do see the value in ESG.
I mean, I think the biggest problem with ESG is a definitional one. What exactly are we talking about? When people talk about ESG, they're usually talking about the E. They're talking about energy. They're talking about fossil fuels. And so people talk about ESG-friendly investments, and this was really a lot of what that panel was about, ESG-friendly investments, without really having objective criteria to kind of measure and compare different potential investments. So that's really what I think is lacking. I mean, certainly people who want to make investments which are, you know, friendly to the environment, climate friendly, they should have information available to them to help them make those decisions. But if there isn't something that permits comparability, you know, if there isn't sort of transparent, objective criteria, it's kind of hard to make those investment decisions.
We recently had John Soldazarno on from Vincent and Elkins. He's the head of their ESG practice, and I believe he's also based in LA. And what he said was that I think the trouble with ESG was, look, when you bring up the environment, you know, that a lot of it causes a lot of people to tune out, and that they start to think, oh, you know, liberal, tree hugger, you know, earth worshiper, you know, new age, you know, it evokes a certain reaction in a certain segment of the population. He said, rather than lead with the E, he said, ultimately, it's about good governance. They should have led with the G. And if you focused on that, then you can build more of a consensus on both sides of the political spectrum, broadly speaking, because I think even people on the right understand good governance affects the bottom line. It affects your share price. So that affects them as investors. So he said, from a branding standpoint, they should have led with the G. They should have led with the governance aspect. But I'd like to bring up another panel that you chaired in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, a year earlier, where you described the policies that most encourage foreign investment. Now, look, a lot of countries have had different paths to luring in foreign direct investment, but as a lawyer, as a problem solver, I mean, and you know, you're also an entrepreneur. You started your own law firm. You're in the restaurant business. You're the owner of a sushi restaurant in LA. I mean, if you could put on your business hat for a moment, what do you believe places in Asia and the Middle East can do to encourage more foreign direct investment?
Well, I don't know that it's any different in Asia than it is in the rest of the world. I mean, the legal system and the rule of law is obviously a very important ingredient to have a foreign investment friendly, economy. Foreign investors want certainty. They want to know that there's that there is a rule of law, that if something goes wrong in their investment, that there's a court system that can protect them, a legal system that's predictable, that there won't be surprises, that there isn't an arbitrariness in government and regulation, which they're going to be subject to. So, I think that's why a lot of jurisdictions have kind of adopted these specialized commercial courts. They call them sort of offshore courts, like the DIFC in Dubai or the ADGM in Abu Dhabi, and of course in Singapore as well, specialized commercial courts, which may, where you may have retired judges from England who are the judges. They may explicitly adopt English law as being the applicable law in these specialized court systems. And you see these popping up around the world. There's one now in Kazakhstan, I understand. So I think there definitely is obviously a very important role for legal systems and the rule of law to play in encouraging foreign investment.
Now, you stress the importance of legal systems, but is it necessarily then a common law versus civil law divide? I mean, in that there are common law systems, and I mean, the thinking is common law systems more conducive to business, or more business friendly, that you're likely to see more economic growth in common law systems. It's but
I've never heard that. I don't know if I think it'd be very hard to prove that proposition.
Well, there was some articles I read over a decade ago that seemed to support that contention, but they did stress that there are outliers. I mean, there are common law systems that are basket case.
Yeah, no, look, that you could argue that the number one export of the UK these days, I mean, they don't manufacture a whole lot in the UK. You could argue that the number one export is English law, which is a default choice of law all over the world, not involving, parties who are British or English. And that's because it's a well-developed body of law. There are precedents. So things are predictable, maybe more predictable. There are answers to a lot of questions in the history and the precedents and the body of the common law. So I think, I wouldn't, when we use the phrase common law, I would say English law, because English law is so widely respected and adopted around the world.
Well, so, yeah, certainly. I mean, that shows in the worlds of shipping and banking. Yeah, completely.
Or insurance.
It's developed that the law is largely settled, and that's why people are comfortable using it and falling back on that particular body of law. So you clearly have a passion for the arts and philanthropy, and given your service to the Academy for Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and opening the Museum of Broken Relationships in 2016 and launching your firm's first artist in residence program in 2021, what was your compulsion to give back? Was that instilled in you early in life, or was it born of the success you realized as an attorney and you said, it's time for me to give back?
I never thought about it, honestly, AJ, in those terms, about giving back. To me, these are all projects involving the arts, which I think are really very important to me personally, and something that I very much enjoy doing. Like the artist in residency program, during the middle of the pandemic, I realized sitting in an office in downtown Los Angeles, which was pretty much vacant during the pandemic, that we had all this space, and why not turn a corner office into a studio for an artist to come in and work? And so we released word in the artist community that we were looking to have a residency, and I was astonished where there are 100 applications. There are so many people who have a need to make art and no place in which to do the work. And we're now on our 5th residency, and the latest call we made for submissions, we had 400 submissions from Los Angeles area artists. And we found it very valuable to have these artists coming and working, producing art in our offices, and basically bringing parts of Los Angeles which we otherwise wouldn't see into our offices. And it's been a great, very satisfying for our firm and the people who work in our office to have these artists working there and to see this art being created.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because something a lot of people don't realize about Los Angeles is there is sort of a downtown, but the part of LA that I think the tourists see between Hollywood and Highland and Hollywood and Vine. I mean, people don't realize LA is a lot of little clusters, a lot of mini cities, mini conurbations. That you know, there are a lot of different clusters and people, and so taking your approach, you know, someone the art is showing you scenes from parts of the city you might never see. I mean, let's be honest. There are parts of LA that are really gentrified, and so there are people who might otherwise never become cognizant of the barrios of East LA. You know, it's interesting that you're using art to give an upper middle class or wealthy professionals a view into, you know, parts of the city that are not part of their typical existence, but that are outside of their milieu, and that's the thing. There are a lot of different realities within LA. There are a lot of different environments, and
sure. I mean,
and frankly, many people are content to live within their niche.
I mean, arguably more than any city on earth.
Yeah,
you have the beach scene, you have the hills, you have the flats, you have the mountains. On the other side of the mountains, you have the desert. You have snow. You can ski and surf in the same day. Not many cities in the world where you can do that. You have great wealth, and then now we have a huge homeless problem as well. So you're right. I mean, it's a very, very diverse city in all senses.
But you're also an entrepreneur. You have faith in LA. What prompted you to open Q Sushi? And I would also add it's Michelin starred for anyone who's wondering.
Well, so, I mean, I do have faith in LA. I love Los Angeles as a place to live. I travel the world a lot. I'm on the road maybe 40% of the time. I always love coming home. I'm always asking myself, is there any, wherever I've come from, would I rather live there? And I've never found another place I'd rather live. So I love living in LA. I love the outdoors and the lifestyle here. It has been, it's Los Angeles and California generally. It's very, very expensive. We have state taxes on top of federal taxes. We have seen an exodus of a lot of Fortune 500 businesses outside of California. I think we're down to only 2 or 3, perhaps in Los Angeles, Disney, Amgen. I'm not sure who else. So it's also a challenged economy, but it's a great place to live.
Yeah, I have met people that I have known, and for one thing, there are people that thought, oh, going from LA to New York, they'd be in the big leagues. And most of them move right back because because the quality of life, New York is way overrated. And
well, you'll see a lot of ex-Californians in New York, and you'll see a lot of ex-New Yorkers in LA.
Yeah.
So
each
city has its partisans.
Yeah, I mean, I acknowledge that, but I mean, in terms of the high taxes, but we also have to acknowledge that is where a lot of the money is, a lot of the businesses. I've said to people, both in the U.S. and from the emigres from Hong Kong to there, okay, you may grumble about the high cost of living, you may grumble about the high taxes, but can you honestly tell me you are not better off in L.A. than you were where you were? Because you sure as hell weren't pulling in these kinds of figures. You weren't making this kind of money back when you were back in Hong Kong.
Different people have different personal stories and experiences. And look, I mean, I think it's a very creative and diverse city. There's a lot of great things about it. But I mean, we also have our challenges as well.
Given your over 3-decade-long association with the Academy, I mean, how plugged in are you? I mean, I know I'm sounding like a fanboy now and a clear novice, but how plugged into you are you into the Hollywood scene? Like when Will Smith slapped that comedian on stage, Chris Rock.
Chris Rock.
I mean, you must have been freaking out.
I mean, people thought, what just happened? I mean, was this part of the act? Did he actually hit him? Was this a joke? Of I mean, an astonishing moment, and
Were you present
think
in the audience that day, or?
I wasn't that night. I was
Okay.
not that night, but yeah, it was. A lot of people were disappointed with the fact that Will Smith wasn't shown the door
Yeah.
that night. But we were engaged to look into it from a legal standpoint, and before it's public information, he resigned from the Academy, and so as far as the Academy was concerned, that closed the book on that very unfortunate episode.
Right, because everyone's fixated on the 10-year ban, but I mean, in terms of it's naive, and even tourists have realized this. That just going to L.A., going to the touristy parts again, that stretch from Hollywood and Island, Hollywood and Vine, that the tourists go visit, at least on the first day they're there. You're not going to bump into too many movie stars there, but is it the case that by virtue of being in L.A., it's inevitable you're gonna encounter movie stars?
Well, I don't. It's certainly not inevitable, and I have to say,
because there's certain restaurants and clubs they're known.
Yeah,
even in New York and Greenwich
yeah,
Village,
you can increase the probability, but
yeah,
I'm not a good one to ask because I never notice quote unquote movie stars. People have to point them out to me. I'm just kind of oblivious to that, to be honest, personally.
Okay. So you've always had this passion for the arts, and I don't know. I mean, it seems to run counter to many of the attorneys I know, where they're focused on their fields, and they're focused on the money, and they're focused on the status and the prestige that comes from that. I don't know. Is there something to be said for living a balanced life? I remember one of my professors saying to us, and his advice only resonated with me years later, that he found the most successful attorneys were those that had interests outside of the law. That the law, there are people that live, breathe, and sleep the law, but the best attorneys had interest outside of the law, in much the same way that it was said that the ideal samurai had to not just hone their martial arts, but the actual fine arts, to like take up calligraphy or painting or something of that nature. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's certainly true in litigation when you're talking about communicating and persuading people. You have to be broad-gauged. You need to have a liberal education. You have to understand people and how to relate to them, where they are, what's going on in the world. I don't think a narrow focus is conducive. I mean, especially when under our system where we're trying cases to juries, ordinary Americans, you have to be able to relate to them and communicate with them and persuade them. And you simply can't do that if you're living in an ivory tower or just some, hermetically sealed legal environment. So I do think, quote unquote, outside interests are very important to being successful as a litigator.
Which then brings us to the topic, and we are affiliated with a law school, so I have to ask, when I was in school, it was said, look, the best for law school is a traditional liberal arts education, which is what I got. I mean, I majored in economics and politics and government. I was a double major, had a strong concentration in economics. I was one course away from an economics major, and my majors were history and politics and government. And, that was at the time, the traditional path, because traditional paths tend to be poli-sci, history, sociology, econ, those, and if you were going into patents and IP, then it was, you wanted to take the patent bar, you needed a STEM background, hard science or engineering. But those are the traditional routes to law school. But now you're seeing people in incredibly varied backgrounds. I mean, what is the right educational path to law school, or does one not exist? Should we
Yeah.
should we regard the LSAT as the screening device, and those that are meant to be good lawyers, the system will wean them out. The system will sort them out.
I don't think there is one right, best academic preparation. I saw a study years ago that there was an effort to correlate success in law school in the U.S. with undergraduate major. And It showed that music majors were the most successful. So,
really,
go figure. But I tend to agree with you that a broad-gauged liberal education is the best preparation for becoming a lawyer.
Well, certainly it gave me that broad spectrum knowledge that if you had a Bachelor of Arts degree in econ or a Bachelor of Science degree in econ, it made a huge difference. That I definitely thought that the former tended to be better informed citizens. They had more of an appreciation for historical context, more of an appreciation for the policy issues undergirding the law, versus the people who just focus on who did a Bachelor of Science degree in economics, where it was more quantitative. And okay, maybe if you were going for an investment bank or a brokerage, you've got the quantitative tools of analysis they need, though frankly nowadays with spreadsheets, I mean, it's more about plugging numbers in, and then you factor in, former head of Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein, was an English major. So that tells you about the relevance of math skills in contemporary investment banking. But yeah, I mean, I do think that there's something to be said for that broad spectrum knowledge, and some people are just too myopic in their focus and in their training, and that showed in law school as well. It's interesting to hear you say that music majors tend to be the most successful, because I remember right about the time I was applying to schools, it was found that the easiest way, and I went to college in Wisconsin, the easiest way to get into the UW-Madison Law School, and they were really recruiting math majors at the time. They really wanted math majors because the view was, okay, fine, it's a difficult subject, and a lot of the the logical thinking and thought process is insane. So, that's considered a good major, a law school, and then certainly, a lot of the logic games that you would encounter on the LSAT, they were akin to a lot of what one would study in math in high school. So okay, so if there is no one path, how do you prepare?
Look, verbal skills are important. Writing is important. Being able to write to persuade, being a good writer, being someone who can summarize material, read materials and summarize it and put together a narrative, an argument, that's going to be key. So I would always, you can't go wrong learning how to write and read and, put together a narrative, I would say.
Sound advice. Was there anything you wanted to add? Any last bits of advice you wanted to convey to our listeners, to our students, as they, either those contemplating law school or those graduating and trying to think of what their next move will be, either, employment or get another LLM, which is what I did twice over.
AJ, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. For people who are considering a career in the law, I'd just say that, I've been practicing law for something on the order of 40 years, never regretted it, always found it challenging. I'd say, like some people say, I've never worked a day in my life. I kind of feel like that. I really enjoy what I do. And the best thing about it, at least being a litigator, is that you're constantly learning. Every case involves different situations, different people, different industries, different kinds of problems. And so if you like to learn, I think there's no better profession. And that's, it's obviously been a centerpiece with my family of my life, and I could strongly recommend practicing law as a profession.
Okay. One last question I want to bring up, because something that the American Bar Association has been concerned about for a couple of decades now. And I know this was true of my graduating class of 2002, and I haven't seen it abate since. The ABA is awfully concerned about burnout. That it seems like 5 years after graduation, about 50% of the graduating class of any given year are no longer practicing. A key reason that's been cited is burnout. What can be done to, combat burnout in the legal profession, or is that just inevitable? Certain people are going to realize the profession's not for them, and they're better off doing something else. What do you think?
Some people are better off doing something else. I mean, practicing law isn't for everybody. And some people go to law school just to keep their options open, because it's true that with a law degree, there's a lot of different things that you can do. You can go into politics, academics, business, and some people go to law school, start practicing law, and decide it's not for them. I have a daughter who went to law school, started practicing law, decided it wasn't for her. She went back to school, became a psychotherapist, mostly helping lawyers. So, there's a reason sometimes people burn out. Maybe they should go do something different.
It's not for everyone, but I think people need to make that choice as soon as possible, because what I've also seen is past the 5-year mark, people, inertia sets in. You get married, you have dependents, people get accustomed to living a certain way, a certain income level, a certain lifestyle, a certain level of prestige and social standing, and then it's hard to pull out, But I will see that. But yeah, word to the wise. So, John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, AJ. Very much enjoyed the conversation.
And to our listeners, thank you again. Until next time.